Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. It's Susan Coffin here, the host of today's Attitude Magazine weekly ADHD Experts webinar podcast. Today our topic is procrastination. We'll be talking about how to help students who struggle to get started with classwork or homework. Students, with or without ADHD, frankly, may procrastinate, may put it off, may just avoid their schoolwork altogether, maybe because they feel overwhelmed, maybe because they're not confident, maybe because executive function demands are just overwhelming. The trick for getting started for many students is feeling ready, emotionally ready, physically ready, mentally ready to begin, but it may feel like a lot of work for many kids. So we're so happy today to welcome guest speaker Cindy Goldrich, who's an ADHD coach, to provide tips for how to help your child understand and feel the benefits of starting work in a timely manner, how to create a comfortable workspace that breeds confidence, how to help your child manage the stress and the worry that may be preventing him or her from beginning their schoolwork, and time management skills, frankly, to help kids visualize deadlines and complete projects. So Cindy Goldrich, let me tell you about her. She's a really great resource for parents of kids with ADHD. She's a board-certified ADHD coach, and she works nationwide providing education, coaching, and support, not only for parents, but also for teachers and for mental health professionals, helping kids with ADHD and executive function deficits succeed everywhere, homeschool life. Her credentials, she has a master's in education and counseling from Columbia University, but perhaps of most significance to all of you, she's the author of 8 Keys to Parenting Children with ADHD, a wonderful book that I recommend to you. And it's based on her very popular Calm and Connected workshops. She offers those workshops both remotely by webinar or in person. And to see the schedule, go to her website. It's PTS, Pathway to Success, ptscoaching.com. The parenting tab, and you'll see the schedule of upcoming Calm and Connected workshops. I think the next one is September. So recommend that to all of you. Thank you so much for being here today, Cindy. Welcome.
Oh,
This
my
is
pleasure.
Cindy's second time on an Attitude webinar. We're happy to have her back. I'd also like to offer a big thank you to BrainBeat today for sponsoring today's webinar. BrainBeat is, if you don't know about it, it's a home-based cognitive training program. It's backed by over 15 years of research, and it uses the same technology as the interactive metronome, which some of you may know. Because BrainBeat is created like a video game, sometimes kids don't even realize the strides that they're making, increasing attention and concentration. For more information about BrainBeat, please go to their website. It's www.focus.brainbeat.com. So check out BrainBeat, and we thank BrainBeat for today's sponsorship. So with that, let me turn it over to Cindy again with our thanks for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. So we're going to get started on it, right? That's the theme of today. We're going to get started. So I love this quote by Mark Twain. The secret to getting ahead is getting started. But the question is, what is the secret to getting started? That's really what we're going to talk about today. But before we can even do that, we really need to back up a second and understand, well, why is getting started so hard? I mean, for many of us adults, and for many kids, to be honest, we just get started. We have something we need to do. We're, early to bed, early rise, whatever it is your motto, you just tackle what you need to do, and then know that when it's done, you've got that free time. But for some reason, we notice that in school and at home, there are many kids who just can't get themselves started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to, as I said, back up a little bit and try to understand why it's so hard. So the first thing we need to look at is executive function skills. Now, this is not going to be a presentation on executive function skills. I know Attitude has so many wonderful articles and resources and webinars on executive function. But in case there are any people listening out there for whom this is a new term, I'm just going to do a really quick, brief overview. Your executive functions are your set of skills that help you manage how you do what you intend to do. I've highlighted that first one, which is initiation and activation, which is where we're going to spend most of our time focusing. But you'll see that all of the other executive functions really are involved in helping that initiation happen. For instance, you certainly need to be able to focus on what you're starting. You need to have your working memory in order in terms of what do you already know about what you're about to do and what's the new information you have in front of you. You need to have a plan on where you're starting, your work and what you're supposed to be doing ahead of you. You need to regulate your effort, which involves your ability to stay connected to your tasks, sustain your effort. You need to monitor yourself, right? Notice yourself in action, that self-talk that guides you through your process. And of course, as always, you need to manage your emotions, right? Manage your frustration, regulate your emotions. All of this is involved, and that's why we call this the board of directors that help you do what you decide to do. So when we think about initiation and activation, the first thing we need to think about is that getting started for many kids and many adults is about feeling ready to begin. And there are different ways we're going to look at this today. We're going to look at getting ready from the emotional standpoint, from the physical standpoint, and from the mental standpoint. So tackling each of these issues in advance, well, that's the ideal, right? If we understand what we need to do to get started from an emotional standpoint, from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, then that's great. We're all set to go. But the thought of preparing to work, well, that actually feels like extra effort for a lot of kids, and they avoid that. So in other words, if you were to sit down with a kid and say, hey, let's talk about how you're going to get started, what's going to make it easier to get started, even that conversation is not one that they are going to want to have. So we're going to have to build a case. We're going to have to challenge the belief that it's too much effort to talk about what do I need to do to get ready to work. So we have to make the preparing desirable and palatable. And there's one more piece involved here. The reality is, for many people with ADHD, transitions are really hard. And I know some of you are sitting out there in your rooms, your offices, and you're just shaking your head saying, yeah, my kid just can't do transitions. Well, transitions are actually 3 steps. The first step to transition is to stop what you're doing, and then you have to move physically or cognitively, and then you get to start. So the reality is, we have to look at the piece of the puzzle, because before they can start, we sometimes are going to have to help them stop. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on that today, but the one thing I will say about the stopping is that if you can talk to your child while they are involved in an activity, or better yet, before the activity, about what are you going to do to help you stop? What's your stopping point going to be? That's one strategy that can work. For example, if you notice your child is playing with blocks and they're just having a wonderful time, and you know that in 10 minutes you're going to have to stop doing it so they can pack up and, get going to whatever the activity is they have to do, you may talk to your child and say, hey, you know what? Looks like you're really loving doing these blocks. These look wonderful. Where do what's going to be a good place for you to stop? So it's not just about the time that they need to stop. They're not necessarily thinking about the time. They're thinking about what they're working on. So maybe we can say, how many more blocks are you going to put? Or what step are you going to get up to? Something to help engage them in that stopping part. Okay, so now let's say we've gotten them to stop and we've got them where they need to be. So now we need to think about how we're going to help them start. Well, as I said, the first thing we're going to look at is the emotional preparation. We have to build our case to address the potential benefits of getting started easier and sooner. And the first thing we're going to do is help them see that when they procrastinate, what they're really doing is they're kicking that can down the road. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that expression. They're not doing it now. They're just kind of postponing it, procrastinating until later. But the reality is, for many of these kids, they know that, eventually I'm going to have to do it anyway. So you have to do the work. So the stalling and the postponing doesn't really make it go away. You still have to do it. So that's one piece of our argument. But we also have to help them see that getting started more easily means that they're not wasting time, and that therefore they're going to have more free time. What happens for some kids is they're in such stall mode that they're not enjoying what they were doing, but they're not starting what they need to do, so that middle ground is just wasted. And wouldn't it be great if they could capture that time so they could put it on the end of what they were doing so that actually it was free time. So that's another case, another argument for our case. And then the next thing is, especially for some of these older kids or the middle school kids, being able to work independently means there's going to be a lot less arguing and a lot more freedom from mom and dad and from the teachers, honestly, as well. When they're able to be the one that can sit there and just get their work done, then they have more independence to kind of gauge how they're going to do what they need to do. So if we can help the kids visualize what they will do with more free time, that actually can help also. There's something called the PREMAC principle. PREMAC, that's PREMACK. You don't have to worry about what the PREMAC principle is. It's really grandma's rule. It's grandma's rule. We all know what that is. First you work and then you play. First you have your dinner, then you can have your dessert. But the problem is that so many of these kids have a hard time with that concept because they can't really visualize getting the work done. So that sense of the later doesn't feel real for them. If we can help kids visualize that future, what they're going to do with that free time, that can help some kids feel more motivated to get ready, to actually do the work now. So we want to, if we can, create some kind of a visual for them. But even with all of this, some kids are still stuck. So if kids are still stuck and are not able to emotionally prepare to get ready, then something else may be getting in the way. We need to think about, well, what is getting in the way? Is it that the work is not reasonable? Maybe the work that the child is expected to do in the classroom or for homework is not reasonable. Maybe the amount of work that they need to do is not reasonable. Or maybe they just have nothing left in their emotional fuel tank. They just feel like, they've just spent all this time and they are just agitated or stressed out or exhausted or haven't eaten or haven't moved around. So we need to really look at what's on their fuel tank. And then, has procrastination been effective in the past? Because sometimes kids have learned that, gee, if I procrastinate long enough, well, I can get out of doing what I need to do. Mom is going to say, fine, don't do your homework, just go in with it. Or the teacher's going to say, fine, you know what, we need to move on, you don't have to do this. So we have to notice if a child is still stuck, what is getting in the way. So has the procrastination been effective in the past? So we are going to start talking about step 2, which is going to be the physical setup. So we are going to create a physical setup. We want to create a workspace that is enjoyable as well as functional. And to do this, first, we want to help our child design, or our student, of course, design the ideal workspace. I know that when I go to work, it's really important to me what my workspace looks like. I like to have certain pictures around. I like a certain clarity of how the space feels and looks. So there are a few considerations. The first thing is, well, where is the student going to work? If they're in the classroom, are they better off working, alongside all of their peers? Generally, I think they are best off working with at least one other student. Sometimes, we think about that they'd be better if they didn't have the distractions of other people around, but when we put them by themselves for some kids, that's actually more distracting. When it's at home, is someone going to have to be looking in, helping with the homework, or just making sure that the child's on task? So we need to think about where is this homework or schoolwork being done. The next thing is the seating itself, the physical seating. Some kids are going to do better, and by the way, some adults do better when they stand. There actually are things called standing desks. You can Google them. There are lap desks, those nice pillows that have a hard surface. So you can just sit with that on your lap. A husband, for those of you who know what that is, it's sort of like a triangle pillow. So if you're leaning up against a wall, you can have that as a backrest. There are ball chairs. These are exercise balls, those huge exercise balls that actually are fitted onto a chair so that the person can have some movement as they do it. Or sometimes, just a plain rug is the best thing to do. And then, of course, we want to have the visual space. You want something that's clear and attractive. You want to have your personal and private representation of that goal I was talking about. Maybe it's, the ball field or whatever it is that the person wants to go to afterwards when they finish. We want to have the supplies be an easy, no-brainer thing. You just literally want to have everything on hand. I would suggest, especially this time of year, it's a great time to just don't even worry about the school supply list. Just go out and buy what you know they're going to need all year long. Because when is a kid going to tell you they're out of the glue stick? The night that they're using the glue stick. So just have everything on hand. The things I would add to that are something called the time timer. If you're not familiar with the time timer, I would suggest just Google it. You'll see it's a wonderful way to mark the passage of time. And I would suggest always having water nearby. Hydration is so important in keeping energy levels up. We could talk about music and fidgets and snacks. I will just say at this point, because this isn't really part of the topic, these are all things that for some kids will be helpful in doing their work. Now, technology. Those of us who are older started our work days before there were computers, but nowadays all kids pretty much have a need to interact with their computer. If they don't have their own computer, sometimes they have access to one. But if they do have their own computer, you want to help them set up the whole desktop so that it is an organized desk, that it has folders and bookmarks, things like that. You want to make sure if your child can, that they learn QWERTY, that's the 10-finger typing. My understanding from all the OTs I work with is that by second or third grade, kids should be able to learn 10-finger typing. So it's still summer. It's a great time to teach them. You can have audio books. You can have dictation software. You can have graphic organizers. I would suggest look into each of these. But then the third step that we really need to talk about is that mental preparation. They need to have a growth mindset, a strategy to plan their time, and a clear head. Now, in terms of a growth mindset, I actually, Susan had referenced that I had done a webinar once before. It's called How Mindset Impacts Learning, and that was an attitude webinar, so you may want to look into that. But the reality is, before learning can happen, one must believe they have the ability to learn, and that's what the whole mindset belief is about. They have to actually believe they have the ability to succeed. But in addition to that, they have to feel confident that they actually have the materials and the information they need. Sometimes kids, we take for granted that they have everything they need because maybe they were in class, they paid attention, or we thought they did, and they went home and they have the books and everything, but they may not feel like they have everything. They may have missed some important information. Why would they have missed important information? Well, if we go back and think about what executive functions are, and we think about that for some of these kids, their ability to hold on to all of the information in their working memory, or their ability to process information at an accurate speed, they may not have been attending and able to absorb everything they needed to be able to be prepared. And then, of course, do they understand the expectations? Are they really clear about what the expectations are that the teachers put forth, that their parents have put forth? And do they feel that they have the ability to complete the work? Or if not, do they feel like they genuinely have access to the help that they need? All of these things are so important because what happens is if they're not in place, kids can feel very stressed, their anxiety level can raise, and what we know is that if stress and anxiety are in the room, that means your ability to think and to focus is greatly diminished. So we need to look at that. Then I want to look at planning the actual time. Well, how much time is really needed for the actual work? Most kids have no idea. If you ask a kid, how long do you think your math will take you? Generally, they haven't really thought about it in advance. So I would suggest to the teachers out there, I always recommend when I do my teacher training, when you give homework, if you could let them know about how long it should take them, and then, of course, if you have kids who get extended time, realize that extended time may apply to their homework. There are some handouts that I have. If anyone would like, I'd be happy to send them to you. Just email me. My email address is cindy@ptscoaching.com. But we can talk about breaks. What about breaks? A lot of parents and a lot of teachers are scared to give kids breaks. Why? Because the momentum will be lost and they feel like they'll never get them back from the break. But what we know about breaks is that breaks boost learning, that literally the chemicals in the brain needed to form new memories can be replenished if we take a break. And I would say that for very young kids, that break may be after 5 or 10 minutes. For older kids, it may be after 10 to 20 minutes. But even adults, 25 minutes, you really need to change the learning activity a little bit. Even if it's just taking a 5-minute break and just stretching or whatever else. We'll talk about some things you can do. But the benefit of the break, of course, as I said, is it boosts learning. In terms of how much time, this is really important. A lot of kids say, oh, I need a break. And then the fear is you'll never get them back. You need to discuss, well, what is a break? How long can that break be? Okay, maybe the break is 5 minutes, and then they know they're coming back. And what makes up the break? I would suggest that it not be something like TV or a video game or something that will be addicting of their time. A break can be, as I mentioned, it could be just a nice breathing or stretching activity. It can be looking through a magazine for 5 minutes. There are lots of different things to do, but I would suggest that parents and teachers that you talk to your child about what the break will look like well in advance. And the next question is, well, is there a benefit to planning the overall approach to the work? I find that, especially with homework, most kids don't really think about, what they're going to do first. Are they going to do the hard work first, the easy work first? All of those things are not really taught to them at school. Most kids, when I ask, and most teachers actually tell me that nobody's really teaching them an overall plan for homework. That's one of the things I really work on with parents and teachers is that overall plan for homework. So there is a benefit because by having that overall plan, you start to see that, oh, I can actually finish at such and such a time. So let's talk about that time. I'm going to introduce something called the Pomodoro technique. And those of you who are looking at this and saying, what the heck is a Pomodoro technique? I did not make it up. This actually is a real technique. You can actually Google it, or if you want, just go on my website, theptscoaching.com. I've got a few articles that really expand on what the Pomodoro technique is. But I'm going to give you a basic understanding here. The Pomodoro is a unit in time. So the person that invented this had a kitchen timer that was in the shape of a tomato. That's why he called it the Pomodoro technique. So it's the amount of time you can comfortably concentrate before you need a break. So as I said, I would say somewhere between 10 to 20, 25 minutes, depending on the child and the activity, the subject. That would be the amount of time that they can concentrate before they need a break. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plan out, well, how much time do I have to work? Let's say I find that I added up, okay, math is going to take me 30 minutes and social studies will take me 40 minutes and science will take me 10 minutes. I'm going to add up all the time that my subjects are going to require of me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan the order that I'm going to do the work. I might even decide, well, I've got a lot of social studies tonight. I'm going to break it up. I'm going to do some of my social studies, and then I'm going to do some of my English, and then I'm going to go back to my social studies. And then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to plan when and how long the breaks will be. So if my Pomodoro, my unit of time is, let's say, 15 minutes, and I see that I have 30 minutes of social studies, that means I've got 2 Pomodoros of social studies, right? 15 minutes and then 15 minutes. In between, I'm going to take a 5-minute break, a scheduled 5-minute break. I'm going to make sure that during that time, that break time, I know that I'm just clearing my head, but I've set a timer and I'm really getting back to my work. What that's going to do is it's going to help ensure that there is sufficient time allowed for the work to be completed. I've got an overall plan now. I know how long I'm going to work, what my breaks are going to be, and that's going to help me. And one of the other really good benefits of using the Pomodoro technique, which, by the way, executives use this as well. In fact, there actually are support groups for the Pomodoro technique, okay? But what it does is it builds your stamina and your concentration for working. Because you know that, let's say my Pomodoro is 15 minutes, then as I'm working during that 15 minutes, I'm going to protect my Pomodoro. I'm going to say, you know what, I really want to go call Sally, or I really want to, do some other activity. But nope, the timer hasn't gone off yet. I'm staying with my social studies for these full 20 minutes. So I'm going to build my stamina. I'm going to stay focused on what I want. And any of those distractions, I'm not going to go toward them. I'm just going to write them down. Now, the last piece we need to talk about in terms of the mental preparation is clearing our heads. We have to set a routine and stick to it. I do a lot of writing. As Susan mentioned, I wrote a book. When I wrote my book, I had the same routine every day. I literally would clear my desk. I would look at my emails for 10 minutes because I knew that was going to clog my brain anyway. I wanted to know what was going on, so I would do that. And then I would make sure I was all ready. So I set up my space. I did my mental mind dump. And then I set my intention. I told myself, okay, today my intention is I'm going to write, such and such a passage or such, work on this chapter. So I really knew what my intention was and what I wanted to get out of it. And then the next thing I needed to consider is a visual reminder of my goal. And I did. I literally had sort of the cover of my book in mind. And, when I would get discouraged or distracted or pulled away, I would look at that and I'd say, okay, that's what I'm working toward. And having a breathing technique. I'm going to encourage everyone to do this with me for just a moment. You ready? We're all going to take just a nice deep breath in through the nose and out through the nose. Ready? In. Out. If you could teach your children how powerful their breath is, this can lead to looking into mindfulness work and meditation work, and even just having that few breaths, it can calm the mind tremendously. And the other thing is having a mantra, having that one statement that helps you stay on your task, that helps you really get started and know that it's time to go. So one thing they can say is simply this: start your engine. I'm ready to start my engine. Now, the last piece I want to talk about with all of this is, well, this is great. Cindy's given you lots of ideas, lots of advice. Oh, I should talk to my kid about this, that, and the other thing. Well, my question is, when should we talk about all of this? Well, here's the thing. We do not want to talk about this when the work is happening. The time to have this conversation is not when you are frustrated with your child because you see, or your student because you see them sitting there in the classroom or sitting there at home and just not getting started. Chances are there's lots of reasons we're going to need to understand. The anxiety is building and everything else. So the time that we are going to talk about this is when there is no work being expected of them. So how am I going to get my kid to do this? Why are they going to want to sit and talk to me about this? Oh, Mom, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about this, is usually what kids will say. So what you may want to do is you may want to offer a trade-off to get their buy-in. In other words, you don't have to do your chore today, or you can have an extra late bedtime, or you can have a favorite treat, or maybe we're going to have this conversation over a hot fudge sundae. Something so they don't feel that they lost any of their own free time. And then, of course, you want to consider, especially since it's summer, if you can, those of you at home, because I know it's not school time yet, but if you consider making this a family project and getting mom and dad involved, I'm sure that there is something that the parents out there need to do to get themselves organized and tackle some kind of a project. If you can help model that, maybe involve your kids, maybe it's cleaning out the pantry or, whatever other part of the house really needs to be, even tackling the kids' bedroom. You can talk about what's the plan going to be, and you can use all these different steps that we talked about and then talk about how we're going to get ourselves to really get started with the work. So that's my overall look at what it's going to take to help kids get started. I know that there may be some questions out there, so I'm going to turn this over to Susan.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That was fascinating. I guess one person, Michelle, has said she teaches high school students and they oftentimes don't want to take a break. She tries to get them. She says they're resistant to the Pomodoro technique, which she obviously knows about. Once they get going, they want to work as long as they can, which is often, more like 25 minutes. Do you have any suggestions specifically for teachers? I mean, since
Yes.
Michelle has raised this topic as for teachers. And also, in general, there's a lot of interest in techniques specifically for teenagers, which I think many of your techniques are for teenagers. But if you could amplify the teenager part of this, that would be great.
Absolutely, I will. Well, one thing I always tell parents and teachers is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I would take that question, I would look at the student in particular that I'm trying to do the Pomodoro technique, and I would help them understand for themselves, well, is it working for you? For some people, they may be so interested and they go actually into hyperfocus mode, right? They're so interested in that particular subject, they're really grounded with it, and they are working effectively. In that case, I would say to them, you know what? Then either maybe you don't feel like you need a break yet, maybe your break will be a longer period, or maybe for you, you don't need to take a break to get this done, and that's fine. But if I notice that either the outcome of their work is starting to disintegrate, so to speak, maybe they're getting careless at the end or sloppy, or their answers aren't quite as on target because they've stayed with it so long, if I notice that, then I'm going to do my work and say, hey, you know what? Let's give this a shot. It seems like you were able to concentrate the whole time, but I wonder if it was really as effective as it could be. So let's experiment a little bit. Let's just try it. Sometimes you want to, again, get that buy-in, just try it the one time and see what happens if we experiment and do it. The other thing is, what is the kid's resistance? Why are they resisting taking that break? Do they feel that they'll have a harder time getting back to it, or do they feel like they just want to be done? Because if it's that they just want to be done, that's where we may need to show them how, you're wanting to get done, but maybe the work is not as optimal as it could be. And in terms of, teenagers, I would say that probably applies to teenagers and everyone, but when you're dealing with the teenagers, you're going to be able to have a richer conversation because their own insights are going to be more valuable.
One thing for just since we're on the high school question, what do you recommend for executive function issues around big projects? I know that's a perennial issue for kids who can't get started at all and oftentimes have procrastination problems. The big projects are really deadly because you just can't get it done in the last night. How should parents approach or help their children approach big term papers or long-term projects?
All right, that's a great question, and it really will differ depending on the age. One of the interesting things that we know is that our sense of time is developmental. So when we say, the example I give in my teacher trainings is, if we say to a third grader, okay, you have a science project due in 2 months, well, kids at that age don't really have an internal sense of what 2 months feels like. They have more of an internal sense of what 2 or 3 days feels like. So you may as well have said to them, you have a science project due in a year. It feels like an eternity. They'll get to it eventually. So the first thing we need to do is consider, what is their developmental sense of time? The next thing we want to do is we really want to break the project down, not just by the tasks, but we also want to make time real for them. So in their calendar, in their agenda book, which I hope they're still using. I know a lot of kids are really just using the smartphones, but I still think there's benefit, and that's another whole thing I could talk about, but I still think there's a benefit to the agenda book. You want to be able to take that end date and really break up the different steps and put them in the agenda book and when those pieces are due. Because that's going to help them have individual targets of, okay, today I just need to start, researching, and this day I need to just start by gathering my materials. So it's broken it down.
Definitely. Since you raised it, can we talk a little bit about planners? I mean, I understand the value of a written planner, but frankly, in the real world, does anyone still use a written planner? And don't we have to reconcile ourselves to the fact that the smartphone tools are going to be the way the kids are going to manage their work? How do you handle that, Cindy?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. There's a difference between a laptop or even an iPad and a smartphone. And what's that difference? You really can see more. Now, okay, I have older eyes, I will admit. So for me, I have to make the font a little bigger on that smartphone than some of the kids do. But there's just so much you can see on that. A computer, or better yet to me, that actual pen and paper agenda gives you more room to really write things. And in writing it and having an overall look, not just of your day, but of your week, that is so important. Because if I can see that on Friday I have a science quiz and I'm looking at Wednesday's homework, then I know that Friday is going to be there. I'm looking at Thursday's homework. I know that I also have to think about what's going to happen on Friday with that quiz. I need to back everything up. So in terms of agenda, I actually have kind of a template that I like to use. And again, if people want to email me, I'm happy to send it to you. That talks about not just what the homework is, but encourages them to look at before they leave school, do they have the materials they need? How long do they think the homework's going to take them? Will they need help? If they're going to need help, who are they going to need help from? Right? How long are they going to need that help? Because these things all will go very far in terms of building those executive function skills. The organizing, the planning, the initiating, the emotional frustration of, the person's not available for me. I'm not, I need them. We need to help kids plan in advance when they want help for another person, for instance.
Right. Okay. There are types of planners that you recommend. Are there brands, or is there a specific style that you think is helpful? I take it from what you're saying that something that shows a full month would probably be helpful.
I like something that shows a whole month, but I really like something that has a lot of room to show the whole week as well. I don't have a specific brand. Like I said, I have a template. It's just my own template that I put together. But what's nice about it is it has each subject, room for each subject. So it's not just a blank. It's got a room for each subject, and it has room to talk about, for instance, do you have a test? Do you have a quiz? But not just check it off, but literally write down, what are you doing to study for that quiz on that day? So for instance, Susan, if it's Monday and they find out they have a quiz on Friday, then on Monday they should write a task, the task may be review my notes. And on Tuesday the task may be do the flashcards. And on Wednesday the task may be write a practice test. So that they're doing each part.
So do you recommend, I'm just trying to think how to implement this as a parent, do you recommend sort of maybe sitting down once a week on Sunday or something and say breaking out all the tasks for the week, or do you think that the teenagers can be trained? They sound like I'm describing them as dogs. But
how about encouraged?
Taught, encouraged to do this themselves. How do you see, how would this happen? Because that sounds great. If you could take the preparation for a test and break it into 5 days, flashcard outline, definitely the way to go. But how do you get your kids to do that?
Well, I will tell you, speaking from the parent end and on the teaching end, I will tell you that my preference is that this be done by the teachers. As I said, when I go into schools, I talk about like having the teachers talk about the overall plan for homework. But recognizing that doesn't always happen in every school and in every classroom, I would still suggest that the parent talk to them about how are you going to look at your whole week. That maybe on Sunday morning, I never suggest doing it Sunday evening because too much panic gets involved there, but maybe Sunday morning, let's see what the week looks like. And the other thing, Susan, I always suggest to parents is you can tell your kids what activities they have commitments for. So let's say they have a dentist appointment, or let's say, you can encourage them to write in what their play dates are, or their plans are, or their social, their soccer matches or whatever else. All of that should be in that agenda book. So when they look at what their homework is, they can think about, what else is involved.
Okay. Yeah. So that definitely in the earlier years than younger elementary school years, that would be parent and child together. And then maybe if you're lucky and that's ingrained by high school, teenager will be doing it his or herself. Yeah. That sounds,
Well, one thing I can tell you, I actually have trained teachers to become in-home tutors, and that's one of the things I encourage them to do too, because sometimes, kids just don't want to hear from mom, but from their tutor, they will listen.
Yeah, interestingly, one of my daughters went in middle school. They actually had a course in which they were taught to use planners and to plan and make tabs, and it was incredibly valuable. I think, she's younger by some years, younger than my older daughter, and I think that concept had just come around by the time she got to middle school, that you needed to teach kids planning skills, and it made a huge difference for her. So it would be great if all schools would formally teach organization skills, especially in middle school, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, one thing I would add to that, though, is that I find, because, when I do the teacher training, I always survey the teachers, okay, what grade are we teaching this and what grade are we teaching this? I find that some schools do actually teach these skills, but then they don't support it in the later years. So when they're teaching it, the kids aren't needing it enough.
Yeah.
And they're not ready. And then, by the time they get to 9th grade, well, gee, I was taught that in 6th grade. I don't even remember being taught.
That makes sense. Yeah. So the right time, somewhere in middle school where they're actually going to put it into place and remember it for high school, but not too early, because 6th grade, who cares, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So one parent asked a question here. All right, suppose this kid has this agenda or this template. How do you get them to keep it? Most of them shove it into their backpack. They lose it. How do you manage the planner or the paper or the pieces of, the skill?
And you think I have a quick, easy answer for that, huh?
I know. We had a webinar presenter once who talked about the homework genie, this magical figure that ate homework. No matter where the homework went, the genie got it. So, yeah.
Right. Well, the thing is, first of all, as an ADHD coach, one of the first questions I always ask parents when they want to do things for their kids or with their kids is the kid coachable? In other words, is he really wanting to hear from you, mom or dad, about how to do this? Because that may be the level where we're going to need to interact, which is why I have my workshop, my Common Connected workshop, because I know that sometimes the kids aren't really listening to you. You're talking to someone who's just shut you out before you even opened your mouth. The kid that is open to all of this, then, these suggestions are wonderful and they're perfect. When they're not open to it, we need to do two things. We need to work on our parenting relationship with them and our skills and tools, or we need to see what other support is there for them so that they can maybe be hearing it from someone else or getting it modeled with someone else.
I think that's a really good point. There are a number of questions here from people who say their kids are very resistant to learning, to whatever. In different ages, people are talking about that problem. So they're sort of way back from the idea of, putting in place a planner. They're just saying my child is resistant to learning, to reading, to studying, to whatever. What should I do?
Yeah.
So
and for that, again, I don't mean to be coy, but that's where the parenting work comes in. That's why I'm.
Yeah. Now that's definitely tough. Let's see. Here's a great recommendation. And we did have a whole webinar on this, I want to say. Just to note that Google Calendars that can sync to phones can be printed as days, weeks, and months are really terrific because, and I really agree with Julie who posts this, the fact is most of us type now, don't write. And if you can use something that syncs across devices and is also printable. And as I said, we did have a wonderful presentation. I will find and post the link to it from someone who talked about just all the Google apps that existed.
Oh, I would love to know that.
Oh my gosh. And how schools were putting in place whole suites of these apps synced to Google Chrome that specifically for schools. And to me, it sounded like a great set of tips. So Julie, thanks for reminding us about Google Calendars and Google Apps. Turning to younger children, when kids come home from school, this is a question from someone, and I've heard it frequently asked in other webinars. Do you recommend that they take a break before starting their homework? And how do you handle screen time during this homework time frame?
Well, those are two very different questions. So
yeah, I guess the reason I link them is because in this case, the break seems to involve possibly screen time before starting homework.
Right. I would suggest, as much as possible in terms of that screen time not be a break.
Okay.
It is just setting the kid up for frustration in most cases. Screen time can be what you do when you're done, or if you want it to be before and they can truly commit to that time that we're saying. Let's say it's 15 minutes or whatever else, and they can truly commit to that before they start, then maybe you could do that. But as a break, as I said, a break really should be, like 5 minutes. We want to keep that momentum going, keep the focus going that they're going to finish. There's a lot more we could talk about screen time, but I'm sure you've even had some presentations around screen time.
Huge issue.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But in terms of the break in general, when the kids come home, I always tell parents, think about yourself. Think about you've just gotten home from a long day of work. For most people, they'll say, yeah, the last thing I want to do is sit down and write that important email or I just need a break. So I don't think the problem is recognizing that kids need a break. I think it's the parental anxiety, and some of it's very valid, don't get me wrong, that if I give my kid the break, he's never going to come back.
Or the transition problem, right?
Exactly. And then the other issue is, for some kids that are on meds, we're on a race against the clock. The meds are going to wear off. And so
that was specifically mentioned by the person who asked about the break. Should we try to get right into homework before the meds wear off? Right.
Now, I don't know how old the child is, but I sometimes would suggest that you have to have this conversation with the kid. I mean, that's what this is all about. In fact, that's the core of my book and my workshop, which is that whole conversation. Being able to have that conversation with your kid in a real and meaningful way so that we're engaging them and raising their awareness, because it's not just about being a parent and making the rules. It's about growing the child so that they're going to make these good decisions for themselves by the time they do get into middle school and high school. When they are maybe closing the door when they're doing work or doing work at their friends' houses or whatever else, we want them to make those good decisions about, should I take a break or should I get to work?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That would be ideal, right? A couple of parents have raised the issue of the fact that they don't actually know what the assignments are. So one person says, Raphael, that a lot of times my son will miss hear when the assignment was given and then the homework doesn't get done, or they hear, oh, I already did that, and they can't verify it because they don't know what the assignments are. Another person, teachers don't share. So what the question is, and I guess I'm curious what you suggest when you do teacher workshops, could they, as part of a 504 plan or an IEP, request that the teachers provide a list of assignments each week so that parents can monitor and can be more involved in whether these are getting done?
Right, that's a great question.
I'm guessing this is elementary school level, not high school, because I think.
Well, let's assume it's elementary and middle. How's that?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, although I will argue that this goes on in high school as well.
I bet, yeah.
So let's look first of all at the reality. The reality is that some schools have better policies than others and better websites than others in terms of helping the teachers be able to put that homework online. Right? Some schools are going to have more expectations of the teachers that the homework has to be online. But barring that, teachers are people, and some of them are a lot more organized than others. So some of them are going to be a lot better about, putting that homework online or communicating it in, a way that's helpful for the student. So one thing I would do is at the beginning of the year, talk to the teacher about what is your policy, how do you communicate the homework so that we've got transparency between you and me as parent and my child, your student. So I want to know, how is that really being done and what is the backup plan? I would make sure that the student always has one or two kids that they can call, recognizing that for some of these kids, they may not have a friend in the class. Whether they've got social concerns or whether they just, by luck of the draw, don't have a good friend in the class, maybe the teacher needs to assign other kids that they can have as fallback. So we've taken away that sort of social awkwardness.
Right.
So we can have that kind of accountability. And also we have to help parents understand why a kid might actually be coming home not knowing the homework. I mentioned in the executive function skills, they may have not focused in that exact second when the teacher said it.
Right. Just
or their processing speed, or their working memory, they just couldn't hold on to it. So many things can intervene, and which is why we really need to have the conversation and sometimes pull in the teacher for that support.
Okay. Here's a specific question. One is a fourth grader and another one is a high school student. So two different parents writing similar stories, which is that their child writes down the homework, makes a good attempt to do it, but it takes an enormous amount of time. And so much time that in this case, Ginger says the teacher was shocked when she told her how long they were really spending on this. And this is frequently the case with kids with ADHD, right? Just slow processing, slow executive function. Even if they're working hard, they're wearing out just trying to slog through the kind of homework that we have today. What's the best advice for parents in that situation?
That's a great question. Well, there's a few different ways I'm going to approach this. First of all, I would want to know, does the kid have an IEP? Does he have a 504? Right. Is he entitled to extended time? If not, should he be? Okay, so that's one thing. We want to make sure that the teacher is setting an expectation that's appropriate, right? Is the teacher telling how long that work should be taking? And I think parent is doing a great job if they can kind of keep a log of how long the child is actually taking.
Right.
And then we need to see, as I said earlier in the slide when I said, after the emotional preparation, is the kid still stuck? Mm-hmm. Is something else getting in the way of getting started? Is the work itself reasonable? Is the amount reasonable? We need to see what is really going on there.
So if a parent, as this parent has written down, takes the actual amount of time and discusses it with the teacher, that seems like the right step, right? Sort of.
I think that's absolutely the right step. That's a great place to start. But then we also need to understand, why is it taking the kid so long? Right. Is he taking breaks? Is he really struggling? Is he a perfectionist? Is he,
right, so right. Or are there processing problems or whatever?
Yeah.
Holly, you mentioned that, if they were really resistant, a child was really resistant to doing the work that, that the parent may need a parenting class. And she is sort of protesting a bit and saying, it's not just parenting skills. There may be other learning disabilities or mental health issues, dyslexia, anxiety, and you can be the most amazing parent in the world and still, have a child. And I think that is also what you're suggesting in the case of homework taking way too long, right? That there may need to be other testing that gets done.
And just to clarify, I tell parents all the time, I think parents parent out of love and logic. And I think that they could be the most caring, magnificent, wonderful parents, but sometimes they just don't necessarily have all the tools that they need, or their child may be dealing with such anxiety and, as we're saying, all of these other issues, that we need to know how to match our child and make sure that they're getting all of that as well. So it's not that the parent is a poor parent. It's just that, maybe their parenting skills are not enough, that they need more support around them.
Okay, that's great.
Absolutely.
We're just going to wind down now. We're running out of time, but I want to repeat the email address that Cindy graciously offered to send anyone a copy of a planner template that she likes. And a couple of people have asked. Many people are enthusiastic about that. And that is Cindy@ptscoaching.com. So if you'd like a copy of Cindy's planner template, Cindy@ptscoaching.com. And I want to thank Cindy. I want to thank BrainBeat, our sponsor today. And I want to refer you all to Cindy's website, ptscoaching.com, as well as attitudemag.com/webinars. And Cindy, thank you so much. And good luck, everyone, with homework in the fall. We all remember what that was like. So
just remember, you are not alone. You're not alone. There's plenty of support out there.
Okay. Thanks, Cindy. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. Bye.
Thank you all.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.